Well, welcome everyone. It's so lovely to see you all on a fall wet night. You guys are the faithful ones. My name is Karen Furminger, and I know many of you. I get the privilege of working here at Bear Creek. My husband and I have graduated 3 students. I love our community, and I love the parenting seminars that we get to put on. So we're excited that you're here tonight. The Bear Creek School was established back in 1988 by Dr. Nancy Price in a little mobile home. And now, here we are. We've grown so much. In 2015, we were able to build this campus that you're in, the upper school campus. From day one, we have been passionate about our mission. It is a Christian liberal arts education in a nurturing environment. And it is really exciting how we embrace all the children here, and the goal is for them to become who they're meant to be. What's exciting is that we get to share this with our community internally, and this program is also for you externally. So we're really excited for any of the prospective parents that have come or people from outside our community as well. So this is exciting as our community comes together around our mission and parent education. One thing that we do here is we don't want to tell parents how to parent, right? But we would like to provide some information and guidance to you. Tonight, especially, we have students here as well. And what's amazing about this event tonight is that the college journey can be very overwhelming. So these are some insights that we are going to provide for you tonight. But again, everyone can do their college journey how they like. For logistics, many of you may know that you will receive the PowerPoint, the recording, and the resources. So you feel free. I know many of you still like to take notes, so feel free to do that. But know that will be sent out tomorrow or the next day. And there will be a survey on there too, so do fill that out. And if there's a comment section, help us plan for next year, maybe some topics that you might be interested in. We don't ask you specifically on that in the survey, but go ahead and do that as we start planning for next year. So now I get to introduce our speaker, Katie Gomulkiewicz. Katie, come on out. She graduated from here 2013, and then you came back, right, in 2017 and worked in our admissions office. And I know at Davison you worked in the admissions world as well. And then she went on, and I really can't, I'll have to read what you got in your master's program in 2020 or 2022, an exploration of standardized psychosocial measures within the college admissions process. You can clap for that. I said that. I don't know what I said, but that sounds really impressive. And she got her master's at Georgetown University. So tonight, I know you have a lot to share, and we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Karen, and thank you all so much for coming tonight. It is a true fall night in the Pacific Northwest, so thank you for braving the wind, the rain to get here. We do have a lot to cover, as Karen alluded to, so I'm really excited to jump into all of the content, and I'm going to try and hold myself accountable to making sure we get through everything. My hope at the end is we will have time for some Q&A as well, so I would encourage you, if you have questions throughout, please make sure that you write those down so that I can answer those as we get to the end of the presentation. As Karen alluded to, this presentation is called Finding Your Best Fit College. And my goal for tonight is really threefold. I want us to briefly discuss some of the trends in higher education. For those of you that have been to some of my presentations in the past, this will be review, but it's really important for those of you that are not aware of what's going on in higher education that we start with that same foundation to understand where we're at in the higher ed world. So that's why I start there. But we'll clip through that, and then we'll talk about what best fit means. That's the name of this presentation, is Finding Your Best Fit College. So I want to have a conversation about what a best fit school is. And then lastly, we're going to review different types of colleges. So let's start with that landscape of higher education. So you can think of this as uptrends and downtrends in the higher ed world. So the first uptrend is the number of colleges. Over the past, really since 1800, but particularly between 1940 and 1960, you see a steady increase in the number of colleges that are actually opening across the United States. So when we just think about the number of options that students have, even compared to the 1940s or 1960s, the number of schools that students are picking between has really increased at a significant rate. The reason for this, does anyone know the reason why you see that large increase 1940 to 1960? Anyone know? That was the introduction of the GI Bill in the United States, which really encouraged those that had served this country to go and get an education as well. So it's an example, too, of how forces outside of higher education can really alter the landscape. So the number of colleges, the number of choices students physically have has increased. The second increase is probably not surprising, which is the number of students attending college has also increased. That was in large part due to the same thing, which is the GI Bill, encouraging and making higher education accessible, not just to those that had served our country, but that bill also expanded other opportunities and sort of set off a cascade of other legislation and other initiatives to help support making higher education more accessible to all sorts of people across the country. And so as a result of that, the number of students that have attended college has increased. And again, this is due in large part to an increased emphasis on access and inclusion within higher education. The third trend is always parents' favorite, which is college has gotten more expensive, right? The cost of higher education has increased significantly. Since the 1980s, since 1980 actually, the cost of college has gone up over 1,000%, and inflation is only around 200%. So the cost of college is far outpacing general inflation rates. And so this is important, right? I mean, I joke about, yes, we probably have all read about this in the news, but it means that the idea of going to college is a significant investment, right? And so it's important that when we're making that investment, we do so really intentionally, that we're thoughtful about where we're going to college. And so because college has become more expensive, it can feel, and really is, frankly, higher stakes for a lot of students and families. So we have 3 uptrends, and then we have 1 downtrend. Acceptance rates across higher education have significantly decreased. I love this chart. It's a little bit outdated now, as you can see, actually relatively significant. 2013 is the last year, but I haven't found one that so clearly articulates not just that college is becoming more selective at the selective schools like Harvard, but at all schools. So at schools like University of Connecticut that are going to be large state schools, or at smaller liberal arts colleges like Lehigh. So this trend, I like this chart because it illustrates the acceptance rates are decreasing and have been across all of higher education, not just the highly selective schools, although amongst those highly selective schools, you certainly see that trend and to an extreme degree. So what does all this mean? Why do I start with these trends? Well, what it means is that there's a lot of options for students to choose from. And as a result of this, it can be overwhelming, not just because the number of choices, but also thinking about the cost-benefit analysis of going to college. So it's not as easy as it used to be to just pick a couple schools and apply to those and hope the financial aid works out. It really is important to think about what is a best fit college, and before you apply, but in the research phase as well as you're starting to learn about schools. And we'll come back to this. I want to give you a very clear, cogent definition of best fit. But before we do that, I want to do a little activity, and I'm super excited about this, so I really hope you all are game to play along. So Mrs. Furminger gave you all a note card when you walked in, and you should also have a writing utensil. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you all about a minute to complete the first step in this activity. So I'm going to pull out my phone, get our timer set up, and you get your writing utensil ready to roll. Okay, so this is what I want you to spend about the next minute doing. Writing down the name of as many colleges, domestic, so not international, but in the US, as you can think of. And I'm going to start the timer now. All right, that is about time. So put down your writing utensil because there are more steps to this activity. So the first thing I want to ask you is, how many colleges did you write down? So when I call out, so count them. I'll give you all a few seconds to count the number you wrote down. Okay, now I'm going to call out some numbers, and if the number of schools that you wrote down is in this range, just raise your hand. And there's no right or wrong here, okay? So if you wrote down 0 to 5 colleges, raise your hand. Okay, so a couple people. What about 6 to 10 colleges? Okay, quite a few of you. What about like 11 to 16 colleges? Okay. What about 17 or more? Okay, so it looks like most of us are kind of in that like 8 to 15 range, right around there. Okay, I want you to keep that in mind. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to cross out on your list your alma mater if you attended college and wrote it down, and any colleges on your list that have been attended by a family member. So your parents, your sibling, your grandparents, your cousins, aunts, uncles, etc. Anyone in your family. Okay. Next, I want you to cross out any colleges in Washington or Oregon that are on your list. I was nice and I didn't include California. Remember that. Okay. If you're still doing that, that's great. So Washington, Oregon, any relatives, including yourself. And then I want you to cross out any of the following schools that are listed here that are on your list. Okay. I'll read them out for you too because I know it's small. So that's Stanford, UCLA, Washington University in St. Louis, Georgetown, Rice, Tufts, Notre Dame, Wellesley, Barnard, Haverford, Middlebury, Colgate, Carleton, Pomona, NYU, UVA, University of Michigan, Carnegie Mellon, Skidmore, Davidson, Williams, Bowdoin, Cornell, MIT, Princeton, Columbia, Yale, Caltech, UChicago, UPenn, Dartmouth, Brown, Northwestern, Duke, Vanderbilt, Amherst, Swarthmore, Pomona, Harvard, Claremont McKenna, UC Berkeley, Johns Hopkins, and USC. Okay. All right, I'll give you all a second to finish that up. Okay. So now I'm going to ask you the same question. How many colleges are on your list? So again, same thing as before. I'll give you all a couple minutes, couple seconds, count up the remaining schools. Okay, how many of you now have 0 to 5 schools on your list? It's a lot of you, right? That's probably over half. Okay, how many of you have around 6 to 10? Okay, what about 11 plus? Okay, so before, right, we said around 10 to 16 was the average in this room, and now no one has more than 11 schools on their list. So what's the goal of this exercise? Is it to trick you? Is it to say colleges in Washington and Oregon or the school that your parents went to is a bad school? No, absolutely not, right? None of the colleges that I asked you to remove from the list are bad schools at all. The reason I like this activity, though, is it shows us that normally we have a very limited pool of schools that we know and that we draw from when we're thinking about colleges. We're familiar with the schools our family went to because oftentimes we've heard stories about what it was like to attend those schools. Sometimes grandparents are the biggest champions for their alma mater. They want all their grandkids to go there. We also hear about proximity, right? We've all heard of the University of Washington. We've all heard of WSU, or likely have, because those are the two largest institutions in the state of Washington, right? We've probably all heard of University of Oregon, because again, that's a large institution right next to us. And then the last thing, so family, proximity, and then press, right? The way I came up with the schools on this list here were not random, right? These are some of the schools that get the most press. And so that's the third way, is the schools that take up the most headlines, the most space, the most noise in the higher ed space. Those tend to be the schools we know about. But there are so many colleges out there. And so I want this exercise to be a reminder to you that none of those schools are bad, but don't stop there. Take the opportunity to learn about the literally thousands of schools across the country, because there's so many amazing colleges out there that really could be the right and the best fit for each of you who are students in the room, and for your kids, for the parents in the room. So what does best fit mean? I promised I'd give you a definition, and here it is, partly. There is no perfect college. I do not believe in perfect colleges. Even schools that are a great fit are not perfect. Both of my alma maters, Georgetown and Davidson, schools that I love, I could tell you some things about those schools that I did not think were great. So just because a school is a great fit does not mean it's perfect, but rather it's about thinking through the criteria that a college has to offer and how this relates to the goals that a student has for their own future and what learning environment they thrive in. These are a couple of the criteria to consider, but this is certainly not an exhaustive list. So really, best fit refers to finding a school that matches your goals for the future and how you want to achieve them, okay? Best fit refers to finding a school that matches your goals for the future and how you want to achieve them. There's so many ways we could go about talking about best fit schools, but I've been given limited time tonight. I promise I won't hold you all hostage. So I've broken it out into a few different categories: public versus private, research versus liberal arts, rural versus urban, Christian versus secular, international versus domestic, and moderately versus highly selective. So these are the categories, the criteria that we're going to look at tonight, and what types of students would be a good fit for those different environments. I want to give a really important caveat before we dive in, which is you will see there is overlap between these categories. No student and no school falls perfectly into one bucket or one categorization. So there will be times when I'm going to have to speak in some more general terms, but please know that I know there's nuance. I know there's schools we could find that are different, that defy the trends, that defy the buckets that I'm laying out. And that's great, right? But for the sake of the presentation, I've got to paint with some broad brush strokes. Okay. So public versus private. What's the difference between these? Well, basically, it's where the schools get their funding from. It's as simple as that, and then the impact that that has on the institution. So public schools are those that are tied directly to the state. They receive their funding first from the state, then from tuition, and then from donors. Their purpose is to serve the state and its population. I was looking over the criteria that University of Washington uses to admit students, and one of the seniors pointed out to me, hey, it shows that being a first-generation student is a considered admissions factor. Why is that? Well, because the state of Washington wants to improve access to education, especially for students who don't come from a family where higher education has been a part of their lives. So University of Washington prioritizes that. It's not the only admissions criteria, but it is one of the admissions criteria there. You might not see that at another school. You might not see that in another state, but that's one way in which a public school is aligned with the state's goals, missions, and philosophies. I also always remind families it's not a coincidence that the University of Washington has strong computer science and engineering programs. Those are really huge industries, especially in this part of the state. It's no coincidence that WSU in Eastern Washington has really strong agriculture programs, because guess what one of the big industries is in Eastern Washington? Obviously, it's agriculture, right? Another important factor is tuition is lower for residents and higher for those who are out of state. So oftentimes students find this rude awakening when they look at the UC schools, which are the University of California school system, because they are very, very affordable for California residents, and they are incredibly expensive for out-of-state students. Private schools, conversely, receive funding first from tuition, then from scholarships, and then from donors. Their purpose is to fulfill whatever their stated mission is. So that really depends on the private school. They get to set what their missional and institutional priorities are. And as a result of that, they often have more specialized programs, and tuition is higher, almost always, than the public state school, but often those schools will also offer more scholarships. So the cost of attendance, which is what it actually, at the end of the day, what you're writing the check for, that can oftentimes be lower at the private school, even though the starting tuition cost is going to be higher at the private school than the public. Just so you all know, there's about an equal number of private and public colleges across the country. It's just about 1,500 in each category. Some examples of public are UCs, University of Washington, UT Austin. Anything that's university of probably is going to be a public school. And then there's hundreds, thousands of private schools as well, as I said. And in Washington alone, there's 29, right? So there's a ton of private schools even in the state. Some examples are Whitman, Whitworth, Gonzaga, Northwest, SPU, and the list goes on. So the best fit for a public school is oftentimes a student that wants to stay locally, not exclusively, right? If a student wants to stay in Washington, they can also explore those 29 private schools. But it can help keep that cost of college down. And it's also oftentimes good for students that are interested in exploring a lot of different majors, because the large schools typically are going to have a broader range of majors, right? Not all small private schools, not all private schools are small, but not all small private schools may have a film program. Most public would. Students that have strong skills, which will allow them to thrive in larger classes. No one is going to check on you to see if you attended class at the University of Washington. In fact, your professor may not even be attending class. Your professor may have a teacher's assistant who's teaching their large lectures, right? So a large public school environment is often good for a student that has a lot of those traits where they really can take control of their education. And also, they don't mind that. Some students love large lectures and some have no interest in that. So it's a good fit if you like those large class sizes. And then also at Bear Creek, we offer APs and also concurrent credit, which are another form of students getting college credits while enrolled here at Bear Creek. If you are hoping to use those to graduate early from college, a public school is probably the best route. Some private schools will accept all of those, but all public schools, almost all of them, are going to accept those credits. So if you want to graduate early, you might want to look at public. Best fit for a private school. So if you don't mind, if you as a student don't mind going anywhere in the country, or conversely, if you're looking at a very specific region of the country and you want to apply to as many schools as possible in that region, then you probably want to look at some private schools. In terms of cost, private schools are a good option either if cost is not a worry or if a student plans to apply for merit and need-based aid. Again, as I said, these colleges oftentimes give out a significant amount of money, especially in terms of scholarships. And students that connect with the mission, right? That's one of the things that I loved about Davidson, was the school places a huge emphasis on service and giving back to the community and really puts that into action. And so I connected with that, and a lot of students will connect with different aspects of a college's mission. And then also students that want to be on a residential campus for all 4 years. Generally, private schools are going to have that option for students, although again, it varies school per school. Okay, the next category is large research institutions versus small liberal arts. I went back and forth on including those size words because there are some smaller research institutions and there are some more mid-sized liberal arts schools, but I think those terms are important because most research institutions are going to be bigger and most liberal arts colleges are going to be on the smaller side. When I use those terms, I have learned with my students and families, small and large are very relative terms. Some students will say, oh my gosh, that college is way too small for me. And I go, they have 4,000 students. That's not small. And other students will say, oh my gosh, that school's way too big for me, and the college has 4,000 students, right? So just for clarity, when I'm talking about small, I'm talking about less than 5,000, and large, we're looking at all the way up to 30,000 students. Now, research institutions and liberal arts, they can cross over that public and private line. Generally, though, research are going to trend more public, and small liberal arts are going to trend more private. Some examples of large research institutions would be Rice, that's a private, University of Washington, UC Berkeley, Texas A&M. And then some examples of small would be Pomona, Colgate, Colby, Harvey Mudd. One of the big distinctions between these, so large research institutions, they're looking at not just the classroom experience, but they also place huge emphasis on research and projects that happen outside of the classroom. Often these are tied to local industry, but not always. It depends on the school and depends on where they're located. Oftentimes, these schools include graduate programs, so they may have a law school, they may have a med school attached to them. You may be able to get a master's, a PhD, etc. At those schools. Typically, small liberal arts colleges just have that 4-year undergraduate degree. And professors tend to be more focused on research at those large research institutions. Oftentimes, that's why they're there. That's what they're seeking funding for, is their own research projects, their own passion, and so that's where they're going to spend a lot of their time. If you're a student that's interested in research and wants to engage with that, it's fantastic. If you're a student that wants more of that classroom experience, it could be hit or miss with the professors at a larger research institution. And that is not to say those professors are not at all interested in teaching, because there are many wonderful professors who have just a great classroom environment at large schools. Again, we're painting with broad brushstrokes. The other big thing to know about large research institutions is that some of them will require students to pre-declare their major when they apply. So you're not just applying to Texas A&M, you're applying to the College of Engineering at Texas A&M. You're not just applying to the University of Washington, you're applying to the computer science major at the University of Washington, which, by the way, reduces your admissions chances from 50 to 60% to around 10, right? So that's the way those direct entry programs work. Small liberal arts, on the other hand, those colleges are focused almost exclusively on the undergraduate population, so students that are getting their bachelor's degree, either bachelor's in science or bachelor's of arts. Students often don't declare their major until the end of the sophomore year. So unlike those large research where you may have to declare it even before entering the door, for small liberal arts, oftentimes you are not asked to or expected to declare until well into your second year in college. Professors prioritize teaching over research, lots of opportunities for leadership, And generally, the diversity is slightly different in how that diversity comes at large schools versus small. So who is a best fit in terms of student for a large research institution? Well, again, you're going to see some overlap with those public schools because, again, oftentimes these are public. So students who thrive in large lectures and then like those smaller breakout groups. Students that want a large social landscape and who have those good executive functioning skills like time management and organization. Again, this probably comes as no surprise. Students that have a pretty good idea of what they want their career to be. Maybe they know, yep, for sure I'm going into business. And students, again, that may want to graduate in less than 4 years. And those who are willing to invest and be proactive, both in creating social community, but also in creating community with their professors. In terms of best fit for liberal arts, students who want a strong on-campus culture. Typically, students are staying all 4 years at these schools, so you should expect to stay all 4 years, and you'll really grow with the same group of peers. Students who thrive in smaller class sizes or those that have a lot of direct access to the professors. Desire for a more liberal arts focused education. That does not just mean English and history. As you all know, because you are part of the Bear Creek community or you're exploring Bear Creek as an option, the liberal arts includes the STEM disciplines, so science and math are part of the liberal arts, but liberal arts education means it's more holistic, right? Students are going to be expected to take classes in math, science, English, history, philosophy, whether or not that's their major. Whereas at the large research institutions, depending upon their philosophy, if you're done with English, you might have to only take one English class your whole college experience, or vice versa. If you're done with math, you may only have to take one math class, if any. And then students that really want lots of opportunities for campus involvement and are willing to be more flexible with those career options. Okay, the next category is urban versus rural. A parent last year asked me this question and I said, what a good question. So I added it to my presentation. So this is another way that you can categorize schools, is those that are rural versus urban. So rural schools, the location varies, right? Rural is a pretty broad term, but basically they're far from a city, right? So you gotta get in a car and you gotta drive for a decent amount of time to get to a large city. They could be large or small schools, right? So this really does cut across the two categories that we've already talked about. They could be a rural large research institution, there could be a rural public school, could be rural small school, and could be a rural private school as well. The size of these campuses therefore varies, but generally the campus is well defined, meaning when you step onto the campus, you go, I am on the campus at Carleton. I'm on Kenyon's campus. It's very clear where the campus boundaries are, and students mostly stay on or near campus. They may venture into the local towns, but a lot of their community and social life is going to be found within the boundaries of that school. On the other hand, urban, again, the location varies, but in the middle or very close to a metropolitan city. So like 10 minutes or less drive from the center of a large city. Again, these schools could be large or small, but the campus is often, almost always, not exclusively, well-defined. Meaning, if you've gone to NYU before, you don't quite know where the NYU classroom ends and where the, boba shop down the street starts, right? Everything is right next to each other in the city, and classes, students will be walking up and down the city streets to actually get to their classes. Oftentimes, urban campuses are connected to groups within the city. That could be different industries, that could be different arts groups, and students often will go off campus more frequently. They may even live off campus, but they'll also find a lot of community, not just within the student body, but within the broader city. So what types of students, therefore, are best fit for rural? Students that really want the home of their college experience to be campus life. If that's the case, then a rural school is probably a good option because there's not really anywhere for anyone to go. So they're going to go to those campus events. Not exclusively, but if a student loves the outdoors, if you love hiking, biking, rock climbing, mountain biking, any of those sorts of things, oftentimes rural campuses will give you proximity to those types of activities. Skiing, of course, in the winter as well. Students that don't want to leave campus often, students that hope to live on campus throughout their experience, students that want a safe campus environment. This comes up more and more. Being in a rural location does not guarantee that. I want to be very clear, but oftentimes some of those kind of just hustle and bustle of the big city, you mitigate some of that with a rural campus. And then students that hope to build connections with the local community. You might say, wait, Katie, I think you have that on the wrong slide. Didn't you talk about connections in the urban schools? Yes, but this is talking about things like going into the schools. Oftentimes rural communities have a lot more opportunities for the college students to actually really integrate into the schools, into local health clinics, into local businesses, because they're the only ones around. So it's not uncommon to walk into a restaurant and all the staff that are working at the front of the house are college students. So if that's appealing, a rural college can be a really good fit. Some other examples of rural schools, I already mentioned Kenyon, Carleton, Middlebury, Miami University, Northern Arizona University, Kansas State. The list goes on and on. I picked those schools because you can see there's a mix of big and small, research, liberal arts, public, and private as well. The best fit for an urban school. Someone that loves the hustle and bustle of a city. For some of my students, this is the number one thing they want. They come into my office and they say, I don't care what city, but get me near a city. They want to have easy access to a lot of activities. They're the type of student that's like, I want to go to the NBA game with my friends on a Friday night. You know, I want to get season tickets to the local opera. I want to be involved in a group that's community-based. Students that want to live off campus. For some students, this is a big deal. They want to kind of have their own apartment. They want to have their own space. And so you can do that in a rural environment, but there's a lot more access to those options in an urban environment. And then students that have or want a job. Yes, you can do that in a rural environment, but in an urban college environment, a student can sort of have their life, they can have their apartment, they can have their job off campus, and then they can basically commute into class. And then students that don't mind a disjointed campus. I always mention NYU because it's a really good litmus test for students on how they like a city environment. Some students love that. They love that you can't tell where the campus ends and the city starts. Others are unnerved by that. So again, it's best fit. It's not what's right for every student, but it's what's right for you and what you're looking for in college. NYU is obviously not the only example of an urban school. Other examples are Rutgers, Vanderbilt, American University in DC, UCLA, Stevens Institute of Technology. Again, you see how those cross across those other categories that we've talked about. Okay, the next way to think about searching for colleges is Christian or secular. And I want to be clear, when we talk about Christian schools and secular schools, there is no good or bad. There is no right or wrong. Students have a lot of different reasons why they may want to go to a Christian school or why they may want to go to a secular school. And even within colleges that have a faith component, there is a huge spectrum of what that means, right? I mentioned Georgetown. Georgetown is a Jesuit school. They have the values of the Jesuit tradition, things like service to the community, things like ethical leadership. But they're not going to expect students to do things like go to chapel or take Christian studies classes as part of their curriculum. You have other colleges where you have to go to chapel, schools like Baylor, where faith and taking both faith classes and having an active part in the faith experience on campus is expected. And then you even have colleges that you have to be a Christian to attend, and you sign that statement of faith when you apply and when you're admitted. So it's a huge range in what that means, what that looks like on campus. And the same thing with secular. It's also a range. Some secular schools actually used to be affiliated with a church and have since sort of disaggregated that affiliation, but they can still be very open to faith. And some of them, believe it or not, even have chaplains that are on campus because they used to have that faith component. So some secular schools are incredibly friendly to Christianity, and then others really don't prioritize having a vibrant faith community on their campus. So again, as I said, the mission is tied to faith, often service for those Christian schools, but the impact of that really does vary. And for secular, just the very clinical definition is no affiliation with any religion, even if they did in the past, and that is really important to note, because sometimes that confuses families as well. You know, on their website it says they were founded by the Presbyterian Church. Yes, but do they still have that affiliation? So the best fit for a Christian school are students that want to take philosophy and religion classes with like-minded peers. They're hoping to engage with faith from a faith perspective. Students that want the options of those chapel services directly on their campus and who want to grow their faith surrounded by a faith community. Essentially, if they want to attend college with Christians and in a Christian environment, then looking at a faith-based school would be critical. Again, some of these schools are schools like Notre Dame, Biola, Hillsdale, Azusa Pacific. There's actually around 900 Christian schools in the country across that spectrum, so there is a lot of choices. The best fit for a secular school, on the other hand, is a student where faith is not a significant factor in the college decision. That does not mean that faith is not a significant factor in the student's life. There are many Christian students that prefer to go to a secular college for a variety of reasons. So those two things are not equal. But if it's not a significant factor in the college decision, then secular schools are certainly something to consider. Students that want to expand their faith alongside those with different views. Students that hope to invest in campus fellowship groups that's where they'll find their faith community, and students who feel confident growing their faith outside of a Christian setting. For some students, especially those that have come through Bear Creek, they feel ready to take that leap out of a Christian environment. Okay, the next categorization to think about is domestic versus international schools. Very easy definitions here. Domestic schools are those that are housed inside the United States, and international schools are any schools outside of the United States. The big thing to know that oftentimes catches students off guard is that the process for domestic schools, as confusing as it may feel at times, is actually pretty streamlined. There's a clear application cycle for students. There's a national decision day is actually what it's called, when all students will make their final college decision. That happens. Does anyone know what that date is? May 1st is National Decision Day in the United States. And so the application process and cycle is very streamlined in the United States, although the application requirements may vary. So what a college wants from a student may vary. Some of them want you to submit an essay. Most of them want you to submit a transcript. Some want letters of recommendation. Some want to hear about your activities. Some want your test scores. Some don't want your test scores. So the application requirements vary, but the process is pretty streamlined. International schools, on the other hand, the application cycle and process can vary significantly depending upon where that school is located, in addition to the application requirements varying. So I'll just give you one example. I had a student last year that came into my office in September and said, "Ms. Gomulkiewicz, I know where I want to go to college." And I said, "Where do you want to go to college?" "I want to go to school in Australia." I said, "That's great. That's lovely. We have a problem, though. I don't know, I'm sure you all know this, but you maybe didn't think about how it impacted college. The seasons are flipped in Australia, okay? So our school year starts in September and ends in June, okay? That's not how the school year works in Australia. So if you start college in September in Australia, you're starting as a mid-year transfer student, okay? That's a totally different college experience. So I explain that to the student. You either have to wait, basically take off a half semester until the next year and then start with everyone else, or you got to transfer in. And that's fine, but you're going to miss a lot of that orientation programming. I've also had students say to me, I want to go to a college, I want to go to college in the UK. I'm like, that's fantastic. Have you taken the UK entrance exam? What's that? Okay, so a lot of these colleges have different requirements. And so if a student is interested in international school, it's super important that they look at what that cycle is, generally your junior year, so that you have time to prepare at the latest. So the best fit for a domestic school is generally someone that wants to stay close to home, right? Wants to go home for the holidays. My sister went to college in the UK, and she didn't come home for a lot of holidays because that's a long flight and that's an expensive flight, right? So if that is important to you as a family and you as a student, maybe you do make the sacrifice and you do come home. It's not impossible, but those are factors to consider. If you plan to study anything that has a pre in front of it, pre-law, pre-medicine, pre-vet, take a long pause before you apply to an international school, because a lot of those countries have different systems to get those degrees. So you can get a degree in medicine in the UK, you will not be able to practice in the United States, okay, because the system's different. You can get a degree in law in the UK, but you can't practice law in the US in most disciplines, right? So it's important to know what are the equivalencies and what am I setting myself up for in the future. Best fit for a domestic school is someone who wants to explore domestic career opportunities and internships. And to be clear, this doesn't mean you have to spend all 4 years in the US. Many students that go to a domestic college study abroad for a semester, for a year, even sometimes up to 2 years. The best fit for an international school, on the other hand, is someone that is self-motivated to review the application process beforehand. As I said, super important. Someone that tests well. Most of the international schools, they're like, it's great to hear about you from your personal statement, but what did you get on the SAT? That's just the reality. A lot of the international schools are incredibly test-driven, and it's the score you get, and you either get that score, you don't get that score, you're either eligible to apply to that school or you're not eligible. Okay, so if you test well, this could be a great option. If you don't test well, international schools may be a challenging option. A lot of students who are interested in international schools have family or friends abroad, or they want to explore living or working overseas, or studying a major that does translate internationally, something like history or even international relations. What a fantastic opportunity to study that somewhere outside the US. And speaking the language of the country or being willing to learn, right? But sometimes students come into my office and they're super excited. They're like, I'm gonna study in Barcelona. And I'm like, that's great. Do you speak Spanish? Is our classes going to be in Spanish? Because some institutions, they're not necessarily going to be, but if they are, you want to make sure that you are going to be successful in that environment. Okay, and the last category that I want us to discuss today is moderately selective versus highly selective schools. And again, these are terms that, similar to large and small, that might mean different things to different people. So before we actually dive into who's a good fit for these schools, I want to just provide a little bit of context. So when we talk about selectivity, and I actually disagree with the definition of highly selective on this chart, which I'll come back to, but I do like this chart because it reminds us of two things which go together. The first thing is that the vast majority of colleges in the United States are broad access or moderately selective, okay? So when we talk about highly selective schools, it's really a tiny percentage of the colleges out there. And obviously going in hand with that, the vast majority of students in the United States attend a moderately selective or broad access school. So it's really important not to discount those categories of school. There is no relation between quality of education and selectivity, and we'll talk about, I have some justification for that in a minute. When we talk about the highly selective, there are around 100 of them. And they're hard to get into, right? So my definition, unlike this, which says 40%, I typically say any schools with 30% acceptance rate or lower. And they're not just the Ivies, they're also schools like Williams, Caltech, etc. And it is really important to think about good fit when we talk about selectivity as well. Because oftentimes students might think that they want a highly selective environment, but there are some major trade-offs to that. So the best fit for a moderately selective school is someone that wants a good school-life balance, right? They don't want to spend all their time in their dorm room studying or stressing about the tests and grades. Students that do better in a collaborative environment would do much better at a moderately selective school. Students that hope to explore different leadership and internship opportunities can be helpful to go to a moderately selective school where you're not always competing against your roommates for the same opportunities. And students that want to apply for merit scholarships. Most highly selective schools do not offer merit scholarships. They say if we gave merit scholarships, we would give one to everyone. So if you're interested in getting some of that aid that's not need-based, moderately selective schools are a better option. Highly selective schools, best fit for those schools are students that can handle and independently desire high levels of course rigor. This is the student that is really challenging themselves, taking classes outside their comfort zone. They love and are interested, and they're not discouraged by pressure or failure. Students that hope to be in that challenging environment, that don't mind competition in the classroom, and it matters to them that they have that national prestige. Because again, that does matter to some students and doesn't matter at all to others. One note about rankings, and this is what I was alluding to before, is just because a school has a high ranking or is highly selective does not mean that it predicts future success, nor does going to a moderately selective school predict that you can't have great success in life. So if we think about the Mayo Clinic, which is one of the most prestigious and well-respected medical institutions in this country, if we think about where the doctors from the Mayo Clinic went to college, this is just a small smattering, and I promise you I did not cherry pick this. I didn't just go and find the 5 doctors from the Mayo Clinic that didn't go to Vanderbilt or UCLA. This was pulled straight from the website within about the first 4 pages of their doctors, right? So no matter what size school, no matter across all these categories we've been talking about, including selectivity, if your goal is to be one of the top doctors in the country, or insert whatever field that is, you can get there. And really, it's about finding that best fit school. So just to remind you, college is not the destination. It is merely a step on a student's journey. So we're wrapping up here on time, so I'm just going to briefly go through resources before I hand it back over to Karen Furminger, and then you all will get this in the PowerPoint as well. So here are some of the resources that we offer here at Bear Creek. The big one that I just want to emphasize is one-on-one advising is the most important thing, the heart of our college and academic advising process here at Bear Creek, and it's because of this best fit philosophy. I would not be doing my job well if I just handed every student the same list of 20 colleges and said, research these schools and pick 5 that you want to apply to, or pick 8 you want to apply to. So I work individually with each student and each family to ask them these questions. Do you like rural? Do you like urban? Do you like Christian, secular, et cetera? And there's a million more questions. And then we work together to generate a list of schools to research, and then ultimately work together on a college list that is personalized based around the philosophy of best fit. These are some books that I really love that can help you further your research of the different types of colleges that are out there. One of my favorite books on this list is Who Gets In and Why? A Year Inside College Admissions by Jeffrey Silingo. I was so excited. I got the opportunity to hear him speak at a conference recently, and he really has built relationships across higher education that have given him unprecedented access to the college admissions process, which is normally really fiercely guarded. So that's a great book. And then the other one is the Fisk Guide to Colleges. It's not the most engaging book, but it's fantastic. It will give you profiles of different types of schools and just basically give you a snapshot of that institution. I just want to leave you with this scripture. I love this translation, and this is really close to my heart as a college advisor. So trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. It's so important to leave room for the Holy Spirit and leave room for God to work in this process as he is working in the lives of all of our students here at Bear Creek. He is working in this college process as well. So I would just leave that with you as an encouragement. I promised I would leave time for Q&A. As I predicted to Karen Furminger, we don't have time to do Q&A as a full audience. However, my promise to you is that I will be in the back, and if you have questions that you've generated throughout this presentation, please come and chat with me, and I would be happy to answer those questions. But I am going to turn it back over to her. Thank you all so much. I hope, my prayer is that you learned a few things tonight that can help you just continue to spark this academic and college journey. So thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Very informative. What I appreciate is that I think education is valuable for both the parent and the student, because sometimes this topic of college, it can get stressful. But I love our school and how they come alongside, and there is a plan for our kids. We'll go ahead and let you guys go. Before we do that, a reminder for our Tools for Success series. We have one more in January, Raising Mentally Strong Kids. So that's going to be by Kristen Gephardt. She's going to be sharing on that. Also, for those of you, our guests, and grade 8 families, even grade 7, we are going to have an open house. Really, we're calling it What to Expect in Upper School on November 21st. You can just go to our admissions page and sign up for that. You're more than welcome to attend. And of course, you can sign up for tours and all those sorts of things. The one thing that's really exciting, and we want you to know, and if you could pass along to others, we are so blessed by some wonderful donors, and our scholarships have grown immensely. And so this will be in you could take this home, but we want everyone to be able to find a place here. So definitely you'll see we have over $3 million now. So we're really grateful for that. So please tell your family and friends it might be something for you. Everyone has seasons in life. So we know our school is there to support and help as well. And with that, we thank you so much. I'd love to close in a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for this time together, and we just pray that you will continue to guide us in all we do and say, in thy precious name. Amen. Thank you so much for coming, and you guys have a good night.